enjoying presenting them to you. I'd like to welcome you today to the latest edition of the AIQRATE webinar specials, the CXO series. Today we have for you Snehanshu Mitra, the head of the Center of Excellence for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at NASSCOM. And he will be speaking about positioning India as a premier destination for AI, strategic perspectives. The moderator today is Dhanrajani, the CEO and co-founder of AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules very briefly. I request you all to please all be on mute to help the listening and speaking experience of everybody. We will be taking questions, which we will answer towards the end of the session. If you could please put them in the panel that exists in WebEx, the Q&A and the chat panel, and I will convey them to Samir, who will take them up with Snehanshu. All right. I'd like to start by introducing Snehanshu. Snehanshu Mitra heads the Center of Excellence for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at NASSCOM. He is responsible for creating, nurturing, and scaling up a vibrant AI ecosystem for India that involves incubating AI startups, leveraging AI to develop solutions for societal good, work with enterprises to co-innovate, and promote academic research and AI skilling. Snehanshu brings in about 2 decades of demonstrated experience in driving business transformation and delivering business impact through data science and AI. Prior to this, Snehanshu has worked at Vodafone Shared Services, where he led the data and analytics division. He has studied business management from IIM Kozhikode and holds a PGDM in data science from IFIM. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Snehanshu. Thank you so much for joining us. Samir, I hand it over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Rohan, for starting the session. And Snehanshu, welcome to the AIQRATE CXO series. In fact, we've been talking about this and we've been trying to get you over this. So good to have you over the show. And I think lovely. The session per se, I think, in terms of the theme, is interesting because not only we would talk about how India can actually attain premier position in AI, but I think the facets of how India is uniquely positioned in terms of taking a vantage position also is something what we'll throw some light, and we'll be happy to pick up your perspective and insights about that. So just to kickstart, Snehanshu, and this is something which I think many of us are aware that while we talk about AI policy aspect, as we speak, almost 30 plus countries, geographies have their own specific AI policy. Now, when it comes to India per se, we also have our own. In fact, a couple of government bodies have come out with the AI specific policy for India. And the policy in detail talks about set of interventions in the various segments of India and how that AI aspect will be touched upon and will have a massive impact. So specifically, having you over there from NASSCOM, I just want to understand, and this is something which we also got queries from our participants multiple times when we were taking earlier sessions. What is India trying to do for AI adoption? Specifically, some of these intervention, some of those adoption by the segments. It will be great if you can highlight, please.
Lovely. So first of all, let me do a mic check. Am I audible to everybody? Hopefully, yes. Lovely. So let me first of all, thank you for having me here. It's lovely to be a part of this coveted web series. I think let us also take this opportunity to kind of shake off some of the gloom, right, being perpetuated by the COVID-19 crisis, and in some ways create an alternative narrative, right, around hope, around anticipation, around promise. Well, so I had the Center of Excellence at NASSCOM for Data Science and AI. That being said, I do not necessarily consider myself to be an expert. These are new perspectives. But basis what I hear, what I learn, what I follow, what I practice, if there is anything that I can be of value, I would be very happy to share those perspectives. the audience today. Samir, in terms of answering this question, I think something very interesting is happening, right? So whenever we're talking about this AI supremacy, the automatic names that kind of come up are US and China. And in this entire tussle, it is almost obscuring some of the silent but very interesting developments that are happening in the India AI space, right? But where is really India right now? A recent Accenture report, I'm sure everybody has read, most of it was a very popular sort of a report that sort of seemed to indicate that India has a potential of adding about $1 trillion, right, to its economy by virtue of pursuing AI-specific policies, AI adoption, right? And this will happen in another 15 years' time. So by 2035, we'll probably see an incremental $1 trillion being, generated with the support of artificial intelligence-related technologies, right? In terms of where India stands, let's try and spend some time on this part. So India ranks about 19 out of 194 countries as per IDRC report that was published in 2019. The parameters that they consider were around governance, around infrastructure, around data, around skills and education, around government's intervention, etc. There were certain areas that we are doing relatively better. These are in terms of the infrastructure or the operating environment. It is important because once again we have very credibly sort of reigned over the ITS industry, and some of those practices are probably helping us. But purely from an R&D perspective, from a talent development perspective, those are some of the areas that where the investments are also lacking, right? We need to do much more. I will try and sort of get onto a slightly different aspect of what you asked me a while back, bring in the NASSCOM perspective. So NASSCOM has been actively representing, it has been espousing the cause of development in AI. We recognized it quite a few years back that AI is indeed emerging as the next growth trajectory for India to capitalize on, right? So the observation was also very interesting in terms of there was attempts being made by industry, academia, startups, innovators, other user enterprises, etc., and also government. But these efforts were largely disparate, largely siloed in nature. They were efforts to build capacity, but in very, very individual capacities, right? Now, these siloed approaches would also bear fruit, but it would kind of deprive India of the scale that we are so intent on pursuing or having. So we carved out 4 or 5 important areas to focus on. Mm-hmm. How do we, first of all, let us say, create a platform for various stakeholders to come in, which includes representation from industry, from government, from academia, from user enterprises, from innovators. And all of these entities would then need to come together. They would need to connect on concept design, on solution development in the areas of AI. The second thing that we realized was there was a need to create a shared and augmented, a technology infrastructure, which would talk about data, which will talk about solution stacks, which will talk about APIs, which will talk about developing cutting-edge applications in AI, right? It will also talk about computing infrastructure, among others. The third thing that we realized was for us to deliver AI at scale, access to public data would be an integral part, right? And that is where research and efforts would need to be made as to how to sort of develop that platform. And the fourth one, very specifically, would be around developing a common curriculum, right? And a courseware, which will then create a base for you to create quality human capital, right? To meet your ever-growing talent requirements, right? So using all of this, taking all these considerations into mind, NASSCOM did a couple of things. One was it proposed a scheme to set up, centers of excellence for data science and an artificial intelligence, and these were based on a public-private partnership model. This would have representation from state governments, from Government of India, from the IT industry, from NASSCOM, right? We come together to make this happen. As we speak, we have a couple of Center of Excellences that have been established with the help of governments of Karnataka and Telangana. We are pursuing four broad objectives, right? I know I'm creating a little bit of a detail, but it's probably important for the audience to understand, what is it that we are trying to do to answer your question in terms of driving the AI adoption, right? So first is very, very specifically, we are trying to foster disruptive innovation. We are trying to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem that will focus on driving innovation. That's number one. Second is recognition of the fact that this whole journey would require deep research that needs to benefit industries, that needs to benefit government entities. We will try and create a use case for bringing all the necessary participants and stakeholders for enabling deep research. The third is we will work very closely with industry to enhance consumption of AI solutions. That is again something that will drive a lot of AI consumption and will again create a lot of requirements even downstream. Right. The fourth one is in terms of creating human capital, which is ready to be absorbed by the industry, so that we are able to meet the ever-growing AI talent requirements. Right. We have four sets of stakeholders that we normally work with. We have government that acts both as an enabler as well as consumer. We have innovators, which are the AI startups that we incubate. We have partnerships with academia, and we have partnerships with industry. I'd like to spend a little time on trying to explain what kind of partnerships are these exactly. Right? So with respect to industry, we are saying that we are trying to right size the AI ambition. These are expensive propositions, and it is important that you spend your resources judiciously. So what are the use cases? What are some of the practices that you should develop, right? Where should you really invest in? What should be your build versus buy considerations, et cetera, et cetera? What is your AI maturity? We'll try and comment upon some of those things, right? The second is we'll try and drive AI adoption through, models of co-innovation, which is where if you're taking your first step, you are not necessarily alone in that journey. We are trying to bring together a pool of subject matter experts to help you drive your AI journey, right? The third is we'll partner with you in trying to promote research in artificial intelligence. And then fourth is we'll provide you the toolkits, will help develop the right kind of assets and provide you the right kind of structure to drive efficiency. This is what we do from an industry perspective. From a government perspective, we are saying that we'll try and position the state governments and India in particular, right, as AI destinations of choice globally. We'll try and very importantly develop solutions with you for societal impact. Remember, one of the things that Niti Aayog report talks about in the national AI strategy is AI for all. What does it mean? It means having an inclusive approach. Don't try and make artificial intelligence sound elitist. Let it be something that benefits mankind at large. So what are some of the solutions that will create that kind of societal impact? Of course, the other two that I will talk about are self-explanatory, and the whole process of sort of working with the ecosystem will facilitate job creation, will try and promote skill development, something that I will touch upon at that later. In terms of innovators, we try and provide mentorship support. We provide them access to industry. We provide them access to technology and investors. We promote IP creation for them. And in terms of academia, we try and look at possibilities of doing research jointly along with industry. We take them along when it comes to creation of digital workforce. We help them provide access to industry forums. We help commercialize the solutions, etc. So all of these are a part of our overall mandate. This is purely from the point of view of what the COEs do, but we are going much beyond as a NASSCOM, right? we have taken a very active interest, Samir, in trying to promote or enable the right kind of talent. One of the innovative programs that we are running is
Snehanshu, because we have some renditions to cover, so I'll come to some of these interventions asking you, because I think you've touched upon multiple aspects about industry, academia, also in terms of what the research piece on the talent side needs to be done. And we'll double down on many of these as we go along. Specifically, now, while you talked at a great length about this AI adoption. Now, in the previous set of sessions, what I'm having with the multiple leaders, I think one common, I would say, if I call it a gray area or a kind of concern area, which is coming, that look, while everyone wants to do AI-led transformation, they want to push the agenda within their enterprise. And I'm taking a very kind of a wide canvas that includes industry as well as SMB and startups. The concern which is coming that, look, they don't have a specific playbook. They are still groping in terms of a larger adoption, because it's like small gigs, POCs, which they have started, and they don't have a full kind of a journey mapping as part of this exercise. Is there something over there just to mitigate this aspect of making AI more broad-based, what NASSCOM is attempting to do? Any intervention or any specific thing what NASSCOM is doing over there?
Well, so, when you talk about specific interventions, there are quite a few, one of which I can think of, and let me know whether this sounds right to you. But one of the biggest impediments that India faces today is the lack of the right kind of AI infrastructure. That is something that I can think of clearly. Playbooks probably will go to a certain extent in creating the right kind of visibility in terms of the opportunities that lie in front of you, right? It will also probably try and guide you into taking certain actions, but it will probably not go any further than that, right? But one area, and by the way, we do playbooks. We have a bunch of different activities. We have a dedicated AI research team that from time to time produces a lot of very meaningful research, and I will strongly urge the participants to take a look at the kind of research papers in AI. We have a huge compendium of articles that we keep on publishing, right? The aspect that I think might be a little more beneficial is to talk about the infrastructure bit and what is our perspective and take on how could we enable this, right? Would that make sense, Samir?
So I'll come to the infrastructure part, because one of the things which you mentioned as part of your narrative is this open data platform, the piece around the aggregation of data, and if the state governments or the public sector can really harness that data, I think that will be a treasure trove. But I think I would just park and come to that at a later part of the discussion. But what I would like to do as part of just peeling off in terms of the narrative, what you had, I want to start with this public services and public utilities in India. Big set of treasure trove of data they hold. While we can always comment upon the concerns we have in terms of how the speed of kind of work or the agility in terms of how it needs to perform is not there. But the fact over there is that if we really look from an AI agenda perspective, there's a lot which can be done in the public services, public utility. And NASSCOM works very closely with many of these public utilities, services departments across public sector departments across India. Any viewpoints over there, Snehanshu, if there are some initiatives or some of those interventions which have happened or are being planned from NASSCOM and the public sector side?
So absolutely, yes. I think it's a very important question that you ask for a lot of different reasons. And let me try and give you a perspective on what we feel this is the right way for public sector to sort of adopt AI, and what are some of the interventions from NASSCOM perspective. I think when you talk about public sector, traditionally we need to understand that they were primarily created to achieve certain socioeconomic goals, right? And these goals could be in terms of equality or distribution of wealth, not so much to chase profit motives. And of course, over a period of time, some of those things have changed, right? So there were also a lot of constraints that were put on them in terms of regulations, right, which made simple aspects such as procurement very difficult for them to manage. And the whole aspect around the operational efficiency in terms of cost reduction, making them financially viable, some of these aspects were kind of ignored for a very long time. And these are very good use cases for AI to come, right? So I probably have a slightly different take when we talk about these entities being a treasure trove of data and sort of managing it very effectively. I believe that may not be entirely true. For example, if you were to look at something like agriculture, right? Okay, let me just say this. What is good data? Right? Good data is something that, let us agree, it should be available without much delay. That's number one, right? It should be something that is consistent over time, very important. And it must be comparable with other sources, right? 2 or 3 primary fundamental requirements that we have. Now, let us say you pick up agriculture as a sector, which is very, very central to India's growth story. What is the case? You have 2 different entities, such as NABARD and NASSCOM, collect data, and on most of the parameters, they don't talk to each other, correct? Even on something as basic as farmers' income, they have very different kind of estimates. So the point that I'm trying to make is that they have not been traditionally sort of created to handle or take advantage of large volume of data, and they have very, very rudimentary understanding of their underlying data assets, right? So that is going to be one of the biggest impediments, and that is where I feel that creation of a robust data strategy is going to be very, very central, has to be very central to their plans if they are to succeed in adopting AI successfully, right? That's number one. What does this mean? This means that you have better design in terms of data collection. You're talking about data ownership. You're talking about accessibility, security, and all of the stuff that falls typically under data governance practices. The second thing I believe, in terms of the adoption itself, to create partnerships for innovation. AI as a game has become also about the kind of partnerships that you're stitching along the way. Whether they are domain based, whether they are use case based, whether they are technology based, it is very, very important to start getting plugged into an AI ecosystem in some form or manner. That is going to be a major driving force, right? Third part, Samir, is something that is typically not getting discussed as much, but I feel change management, which is where you have your senior level officials, becoming aware of the kind of advantages that AI brings to your table, right? And embracing them. It's not so much about replacement or displacement of workforce. Maybe to start off with, it will just be a cobot working with you rather than replacing you. So how do you bring in that culture of adoption fundamentally so that you become motivated in adopting AI, right?
So if I may, Snehanshu, chime in, and you've touched a relevant point while you gave the premise about what public sector is all about in terms of their charter, which of course needs to change as part of the changing aspect of Vibrant India or Make in India. The fact you mentioned about data strategy is very pivotal, because I think there is a contrarian view if we look at what experts are saying, that look, and you mentioned as the initial part of your narrative, there is a catch-up game we are playing with China and US on the AI supremacy, because that's where the rubber hits the road, where we are saying, look, if the public sector, and it contributes a significant amount in terms of India's GDP still today, needs to really come alive, AI could be a Trojan horse over there in terms of being a catalyst. And you rightly said about this change management. But this aspect, and I'm just trying to kind of also talk about some structural dysfunctionalities which we have, and as any countries, I mean, set of countries will have, we also have our own kind of inefficiencies in the system. Now the fact is co-creation, partnerships, this whole aspect of kind of taking help of the experts. This is not a playbook the public services really believe about. So is there something what NASSCOM can do to act as a bridge? And I know NASSCOM has influenced various kind of, let's say, bodies, and a lot of those kind of segues NASSCOM has created over the years. So is there something what NASSCOM can do over there just to ensure it's accelerated rather than we're just going into the data strategy piece, which to us today is a catch-up game?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we have been doing by virtue of our entire communication process through events or various programs is trying to create a visibility around the art of possible. What is the art of possible? I think that is very, very important. And once that art of possible resonates in the mind of the decision-making team, there is this whole propensity for them to filter it down to the mid-level managers. Typically, they are the ones who need to get involved. As far as public sectors are concerned, right? So we'll try and continue to take a focused approach there. That's number one. But two is more specific interventions in terms of conducting the right kind of workshops within some of these entities where we are inviting them and we are showcasing, how similar use cases elsewhere are being solved with a fraction of cost, right? Or creating exponential kind of impact with the help of these emerging technologies. So some of those showcase events where innovators are getting platforms to directly showcase the right kind of solutions, and we have a number of them, right? As a matter of fact, COE itself has this property called experience AI. The whole idea is to bring in different kinds of innovators, right? Give the innovators the stage and bring in large enterprises, public sector undertakings onto the board, and then really start creating that conversation or dialogue, right? Without getting them to necessarily commit on something, right? So I'm saying that first of all, it has to start with awareness, then it has to move into ability, right? And then it has to lead to adoption, followed by acceleration. I think we'll have to be mindful of that journey, Sam. Hope that answers.
So I think this four-year approach, what you said, if I think we can just make it a rallying cry with the public sector. I'm sure there's a lot to kind of learn from that for public sectors to really adopt. Let me shift because I think that this is a topic which to me, Snehanshu, we can cover in 3 hours and we'll still have a lot of rumination.
We'll have a lot to talk about. Absolutely.
We have that time or window, and I want to touch various spectrum. And I'm also mindful of the questions which are steadily coming in. So this is what I'm trying to mesh the question, even what I had in terms of taking a view. Now, you mentioned about research, academia. China has very recently surpassed US in terms of the research publication, close to about 50,000 plus, which means they have equivalent number of PhDs. India is far below. We're just at 3,000 in terms of the annual PhD kind of, let's say, workforce what we generated. Rather, it's a number, not even a workforce. Now, the fact if we take a distill down of AI, it's still lesser. Now, research and innovation is a very key ingredient for AI because this will feed into academia, this will feed into public sector, into industries, startups, SMEs. And while I think there are things around AI curriculum, right from, I would say, school level to start with, there aren't enough books, recommended books. Higher education, we have issues in terms of seeping in a right set of cohorts and kind of knowledge base around AI. But industry has this viewpoint that, look, when I'm getting the talent, when I'm deploying the talent or inducting the talent from the universities, I have issues. They don't understand what the industry wants. So I'm just trying to build a chain. And I know NASSCOM has very, very rigorously pursued this whole chain. What's your viewpoint? And this is also some of the questions we had. So I've just linked up everything and posed that entire set of spectrum to you, Snehanshu.
Very important question. Very important question. AI fundamentally is research driven, and it's just no secret that India is not doing very well, right? My estimate says that there are less than 1,000 PhDs in India available who are doing meaningful research, and that's a very small number to sort of support the kind of aspirations that we have, right, to take the pole position. That being said, I think there's one thing okay. Let me try. How do I mute this chat window? That would have been nice.
You can just go to the corner and take it off. Is relaying the questions to me. So.
Okay. Yeah. So, there are two things. I mean, one is you need to understand why this is happening. And I have approached, and this purely basis my own experience of talking to a large number of academic institutions apart from my own. I think the pushback is really coming in terms of what does it really mean for us? Where is the industry support, and third is where is the money, right, to support this our research efforts. And then these are very valid, questions. These are very valid questions. You cannot just wish them away. The numbers are not looking good. There has to be a lot of research-based activities. The part that I think we need to address the elephant in the room. We'll have to agree that the amount of funding support coming in from private, sector is really, really abysmal. If you were to look at two different approaches, one of US, one of China, US follows a predominantly private sector-led investment, right? Which is where massive amounts of money is being put into sort of AI research. Looking at one of which fundamentally goes into deciding the right kind of use cases that enterprises need to follow. And when your use cases are very well researched, then I think you've already overcome a major hurdle, right? And you can build on top of that. That's one. The other model really is what China is following, where everything is state-owned, state-funded. But over a period of time, it's very interesting that while state is putting in the seed money, it is now getting to a point where it is being surpassed by private investors, right? Enterprises coming in and willing to double it up, right? I think that is a big shortcoming as far as where India finds itself. The funds are merely trickling down. We got to find out a mechanism to make it happen. So I do not have I cannot articulate this point in any different words. It is what it is, right? So I completely take your point, but the push really has to come in from a lot of investment perspective. We'll have to give the means to people to make it seem worthy of their time to invest in quality research. We need to ensure that these consistently find mention in international publications, and that kind of a critical acclaim is coming back as a part of the feedback process. And over a period of time, some of these things will grow. That's my view.
Sure. So shifting gears, I think while we have touched upon academics and public sector and services, there's another large segment in India, which is, to me, often neglected, but very important, which is the small and medium enterprises. 12 to 14% of our GDP comes from there. Now, in this COVID pandemic time, we all know that they're struggling on multiple fronts. And as an adoption area in terms of new age technologies, they are far behind. But the scope, the opportunity is immense. What are your thoughts? And this is Snehanshu talking in terms of AI accelerating the SMBs and taking SMBs to the next level.
Good question again, right? So if I were to close my eyes and then really think about what is the one big concern that plagues SMBs and startups, right? Whether it is India, whether it is globally, is to really be able to find out a way to compete more effectively, right? With more larger established players, global players. And it is not a new topic that I'm trying to touch upon. There's been a subject matter of a lot of MBA school discussions, and there have been case studies of how sort of they have gone on to beat large corporations. And I don't think that has changed. That will still be the fundamental considerations. How do I make myself relevant and competitive given my limited resources? And there's so much of an optimization problem for artificial intelligence to solve, right? So with that in mind, let us agree that the use case here is one around how do you create a level playing ground, and can artificial intelligence sort of be the invisible hand which allows you to do that? SMEs have now started to collect data, started to analyze data, they have started using the insights to sort of take smart decisions. And to me, there are 2 or 3 use cases for AI, right? One is in terms of providing a consistent user experience, right? That every single transaction is consistently the same. Every single user experience is the same, right? So how do you sort of deploy AI to manage that? Two is to be able to become very frugal when it comes to managing your operating costs, right? So that is a very good use case for AI. And the third is to be able to provide 24/7 service, right? And then we talk about automated chatbots. We talk about other intelligence being funneled in through the efforts of artificial intelligence. These are the 3 things that I believe what SMBs could do to try and make it worthwhile, right? One thing that I would probably like to caveat, uh, you know, here is to say that AI, despite its lower development costs, courtesy all the online platforms and Google's and Amazon's coming in, is still an inherently expensive proposition, right? So they will have to be SMBs and startups who need to be very, very sort of thought through in their approach and try to determine where they should be investing their efforts. Or they could just end up getting caught into means or ends, right? So what is it that you're really pursuing? Maybe they're just continuing to pursue something that was not very central to the idea, but by the time they have realized it, it's a little too late. They've already lost it. So that is the single thing that I would want to caveat it, right? That's my view.
Sure. So I think that's a good set of points what you gave, and I want to now circle back to the narrative which was still left unfinished, which was about this open data platform. If I just assimilate what you said, Snehanshu, I think the game what we are playing, and if I use that word game, what we are playing to make India position in terms of attaining AI supremacy, to me looks a bit still at a base or intermediate level, but it needs to be taken at a larger canvas level. I think one of the things, if we talk about open data platform and you talked about this frugal thing and also AI being expensive, certainly so. But if we take some perspectives out here, now think of this, and this is more like a scenario, and I want to take your opinion. If the national, I would say, aspect of pushing the state governments to put their data of the various segments, be it agriculture, healthcare, or let's say other kind of, let's say, public services data, on an open platform comes in. You make those co-creative kind of, let's say, collaborations with the Amazons or let's say the large players, the NVIDIAs, Intels, who can push a lot of data infrastructure in terms of cloud, in terms of quantum computing, in terms of, let's say, a lot of technology advancements. And then you also bring in pure play AI players, consulting providers, IT bellwether companies who have AI prowess and say, look, put your APIs, functionalities by the segments, agriculture, public services, healthcare, mining, manufacturing for SMB. It creates a national AI platform, which anyone can go and log in, become a member, and things in terms of the catch-up game, what we are talking about, it's more accelerated. What's the viewpoint? While I've given a very quick, aspect, what's your viewpoint? Is it doable? Is it feasible in terms of doing this thing just to kind of catch up and kind of really say, look, we have arrived from an AI standpoint?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very powerful question. This is a very powerful concept. This is something that even Niti Aayog, if we were to go through it, it tries to touch upon. It recognizes it as a area of concern, as something that India must actively do something about to try and address. Right. There are a couple of efforts. I mean, in my discussions with the government, I consistently see them sort of understand this point and even ask me as to how this can be made possible. We have a dedicated team at NASSCOM, just trying to throw a little bit of a NASSCOM spin at it. We have a team that is focusing on one of these initiatives, which is to try and create the architecture for open data platform. there are several sort of hurdles that we need to cross, right? So one is really in terms of what defines data ownership, right? What kind of checks and balance? If I put it, right, does the data belong to me? Who does it really belong to? What are the terms of usage, right? If there is any value created out of it, would a part of it be attributed back to the person who had put the data, and who does it really belong to? So the whole question of ownership becomes very, very important. There's something that we need to solve. Some countries have gone about putting certain rules. I think there's a deeper discussion that needs to be had, right? That's one. Two is, I think there are a whole lot of data privacy concerns. And again, I'm not talking anything new. This has been around for so many years now, but over the last couple of years, it's becoming even more important in India's parlance, right? So we need to be able to put the right kind of guidelines in place that takes care of data privacy concerns, right?
So just to chime in over there, we had some recommendation in terms of Sri Krishna committee report on data privacy and guidelines. Uh, is the report tabled already, or there is still some process which is involved in terms of coming out with our own GDPR equivalent for India?
Yes, that is, I learn, is a work in progress, and I'm very confident that we'll see a very robust, framework being put out. I know for a fact that entities such as Niti Aayog and MeitY, etc., they're taking a very active interest. And I'll tell you what, with this whole COVID-19 situation, I think the need has become a little more visible, and these kind of issues would need to be solved. We at COE, again, not so much I'm trying to plug in a NASSCOM, but that is where I work. So, I have a certain perspective. We're trying to work on a bunch of different use cases, right, that would help with the government. But there were fundamental data privacy concerns. What if we were to leak the details of patients and stuff like that? So these are questions, right kind of questions, but unless we have a mechanism to answer them, the data privacy does not say don't release data. It says that release it in a manner that nobody's privacy is affected, right? So that we need to get right, I think, right? So that's the number.
One of the questions, or not a question, basically a comment which is coming on the chat window while you were speaking in a lighter vein, you said about data privacy. The fact over there, Snehanshu, is, as we say, what a chief data officer or a chief transformation officer could not do. COVID did that in terms of the acceleration of digital and AI transformation. And suddenly we see a spate of companies today, BPM players working and having their actually employees, most of them working from home. So the data privacy concern has really got into a consideration, has taken that kind of a, let's say, meeting you rightfully said. And the same thing, I'm sure, can be accelerated if the government really talks about saying, look, we got to find a solution. The solution is now. So maybe that could be a kind of a, let's say, way to just quicken up the pace over there.
Oh, absolutely. Opportunity in crisis. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we are having a mini conference on this. It is a very apt placement for the topic itself. But then I think I would like to give 1 GB of data free to the gentleman, the person who's asked this question. I think that's a very smart way of articulating what the chief digital officers haven't been able to drive. The COVID situation has probably done it. That's a very good way of looking at this entire situation. Entirely agree. Just one or two bits before we finish up this piece around the data platform, right? So the other bit that is very, very important is to ensure how do you sort of the findability issue, right? How do you look at the data that is relevant to you? How do you get to the right kind of variables and data sets, right, in a jiffy? That would again sort of, so this part is to do with the user experience, right? This part is to drive adoption and drive downloads of data sets. So that is the third thing that I would probably want to talk about, which is the how do you sort of ensure that the data is something that can be referenced with other data sets? How do you find the right kind of data sets? All of this is to do with the user experience. So that is another aspect that needs to be really thought through as you're building this up.
Great. So one of the facet in terms of this entire spectrum of AI for India we haven't touched is the startups. And that's a set of questions also we have around this aspect and theme. And you mentioned in your initial part of the narrative that NASSCOM has incubation hubs, and NASSCOM also kind of co-creates in terms of certain solutions and kind of, let's say, products and MVPs working with startups on the AI side. Would you like to elaborate in terms of what NASSCOM is doing in that side in terms of startups specifically and from an AI standpoint of view?
Absolutely. So I think if I were to try and see what is the main KPI for us, it is to try and find out uh, which of the startups really have the potential to create maximum amount of disruption, right? This disruption, the unit of measurement is not always whether you're going to become a unicorn in the next 3 to 5 years, but have you been able to fundamentally impact the ways of working, right? Ways of working could be in terms of what you're doing to in terms of changing the business landscape, or what kind of impact you're driving for the society, or you're trying to bring in an innovation that is improving the way you do things 10x, right? So right from the time that we get a startup to be a part of our ecosystem, that is one of the fundamental considerations. And then we work very closely with them to try and see what kind of mentorship support and intervention that they would require from time to time. Right now, one of our startups, very happy to see, maybe a little premature, maybe one of my team members would be angry at me for me to reveal this, is working on sort of using AI and blockchain to fundamentally sort of change the way public distribution system in India works, right? So you simply end up carrying your Aadhaar card or your ration card, and you can literally walk into any store, and is there a way in which you could get your ration supplies, right? Rather than scouting for the right kind of place where you're enrolled and stuff like that. So while the startup may not end up making a lot of money, the impact that you're creating is absolutely transformational, right? So a lot of people are trying to support the startup suddenly in the last 15 days or so to try and make this happen. So this is the kind of interventions that we provide, the promotions that we provide. So, for example, in relation to the startup, we are trying to look at how do we sort of make the idea more robust? How do we try and ensure that the funding, that the startup requires the right kind of funding? How do we ensure that this idea gets a hearing at the right, bureaucrats' offices, right? It is to say that how do we create a project plan over the next 12 months, 18 months, so on and so forth. So that is where the center of excellence is really coming and making things happen. So just to contextualize, things here.
Great. So one of the aspects, Snehanshu, is what is coming out and really resonating in your narrative is, well, AI certainly has that potential in terms of solving large, complex, unresolved problems of India. While there could be issues around the data privacy, to the regulations, to the aspect in terms of how do we capture data, some inertia in terms of, let's say, adoption. But if we take a viewpoint, and this is something I'm just also trying to mesh a question which has come in very relevant. Look, the time of the crisis, as you rightly mentioned, is an opportunity. If we look at this spectrum of India in terms of the various kind of, let's say, schemes and interventions we have, public distribution system, you're talking about precision agriculture, we're talking about, let's say, GST, we're talking about, let's say, Swachh Bharat campaign, Make in India. There are multiple initiatives like this. Now, seemingly this initiative of India has a pan kind of, let's say, citizen approach, which means it has to reach to the last mile. And subtly, in the time of, let's say, COVID, we are talking about, let's say, the simple example, the government has given a grant or a set of subsidies to various sectors, just needs to be evaluated if it's reaching to the last mile. Now, AI over there can play a pivotal role. It's a huge game changing, and you've also come in from an industry, you've solved multiple problems leveraging AI. What's your viewpoint? And this viewpoint is more about India solving large, complex, unresolved problems through AI for the betterment of citizens.
Yeah, so I think I'll probably lean on how Niti Aayog is looking at it, and has taken a very considered opinion. I think it has gone about consulting a lot of people from different walks of life to come up with this. It has identified 5 or 6 broad areas where large scale impact can be created, and this includes agriculture, education, mobility, infrastructure, smart cities, and healthcare. I think if I get the 5 categories right. And then it has gone on to sort of create a lot of different use cases. And why I think the reason behind sort of creating a focus around the sectors, and two, creating the indicative list of use cases is for innovators to start thinking, right, and doing something in those areas, right? So one thing that I would probably want to so if I were a part of that team, one additional thing that I would recommend doing is for government to bring up a strong procurement policy, right? So you would probably be aware, Samir, that in many countries, I think Singapore, Japan, Korea, and a few other countries, they actually have a policy which says that government has a first right of refusal. So I'm your first customer by default, right? Now you got to bring to me a proposition that is not good enough for me, but consider me to be your first customer, right? And then the entire pipeline has been enabled in such manner. Last year in 2019 in September in Geneva, where the World Economic Forum conference was held, I think there was this whole procurement policy document that was unveiled, and UK became the first one to sort of raise its hand up and say that let me implement it, right? So it has gone about piloting the recommendations. So now you have identified the areas, you have given the indicative list of use cases. You are saying that I will support your ecosystem efforts, and I will also give you a procurement policy so that you can look at me as your first customer. This to me completes the chain of efforts, right? And this will be the path to AI adoption by government.
Great. So I think so truly you said right thing about this procurement thing, because I think this whole aspect about if government can actually be the first customer, and the consideration of not being a guinea pig, but the consideration of, okay, I'm the first one to be into a zone where I can provide that comfort to the larger ecosystem that things work, could be a drastic mindset, I think, in the time to come. So valid point. One of the facets I want to touch, Snehanshu, and which I think for the sake of discussion, this cannot be avoided, is education. And this is not in terms of, I would say, what should be done, but seemingly the talent base of AI is still a very small pot. We still don't have a larger base. The industry needs 300,000 open positions given the scenario we are into, AI, data science, analytics over there. 1:35 is the selection rate ratio. And we have seemingly a very large deployment challenge for many of the engineers and MBA graduates from tier 2, tier 3, even tier 1 now. Now, on one side, we see opportunities of so many multiple positions being available in AI. And on the other side, we have those specific deployment issues or the challenges. What's your take over there?
Let me answer this very quickly in the interest of time. We have 4 more minutes to go. Very quickly, I would say that let me try and group this into prevention and cure, right? So it might sound a little provocative, but so be it, right? Why not? I say that the prevention part of it stems from the hypothesis that you got to catch them young, right? Till up to, I think, a year back or so, we were trying to infuse the AI as a part of the standard curriculum from standard 8 or something. China has taken to the other extreme, right? So they are infusing some of these concepts into the curriculum from grade 4, right? US has a very standardized curriculum, right? A framework that talks about how topics should progressively paced to students as they're changing they're moving on. With India, I think where we have gotten to is now they're saying that from class 6 onwards, we'll start infusing some of these concepts and we'll get you ready. The programming concepts will also be sort of taught, and you will be at a certain stage of readiness already by the time you're passed out, you've done your class 2. I think that's a strong step in the right direction, right?
Where are the textbooks? because I hope this particular webinar session goes to AICT Chairman, Mr. Sastibudhi, and he's a progressive person, and this has been a rant from many of the academicians. Look, we don't have the textbook, and even the faculty needs to be trained, rightfully, as you said in the initial part of a narrative. So is there a way this can be kind of accelerated?
Yeah, so I think this is also to do with how we at society are also collectively becoming aware, right? So the push cannot just be from Niti Aayog or policy makers. We also have a certain kind of responsibility. The fact of the matter is that our careers are no longer secured, right? We need to have a very deep understanding of technology, regardless of what we do. And maybe fear could act as a motivation. Maybe it's just that we're seeing technology all around and we see the impact it is creating on a society. That will act as a trigger. But the adoption also has to be our responsibility. So, for example, there's this program that NASSCOM is trying to drive. We are talking about 5 or 6 chapters at a school level. You introduce yourself to AI. There's this machine learning topics. You understand data. You learn in depth about maths and data visualization. Just look at it, right? Then you are getting into building algorithms and you're getting into programming languages for AI, right? And finally, you end up also studying the ethical aspects of artificial intelligence. I think I'm very optimistic that this model will actually give us the right kind of results, right? If you're trying to fix it at a graduation level, you're probably already a little late in the game.
Great. Snehanshu, we would have loved to carry on, but we are top of the hour. And this, I would call it a riveting discussion. And just to catch on to the thing, what you said, all these sessions have been deliberately positioned to be thought-provoking. I mean, more kind of radical in terms of the output, because that's the recommendation. Suggestions we would like to take from experts like you and give it back to the larger participants, and many of them are senior decision makers over there, just to make them understand, look, I think the fallacy of crisis in terms of the time of COVID is not to get stunted, but to grow as we come out post-recovery, and which will happen very soon. And good part of this discussion, as I relate and really kind of recapitulate, is the various spectrum diaspora of themes what you talked about, right from the education to kind of, let's say, evangelization, to the public sector, to kind of, let's say, SMB, startups, even education, agriculture. And I think what I could make out is, I think the potential is enormous. The government is, of course, trying to do in terms of being more progressive, more outward looking, and doing a lot of evangelization. But I think it's a more factor of all the ecosystem players, government, academia, startups, government, I would say research bodies or consortia coming together, corporates coming together, and really kind of being part of that to say, look, I can contribute, I can do my bit, and let's see how the whole sum total of the equation looks like. And I think this is so kind of, let's say, true when you said all these things, that look, at some level, it needs to be coming out as a kind of, let's say, secret sauce for us to take for a mass adoption. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate. And in fact, the questions I loved, about almost 20-25 questions came in terms of having a very concerted, serious kind of, let's say, audience we had in terms of really. And as a kind of a parting comment, I would say one of the questions was that, is it time for India to have a chief AI officer for India, maybe a separate ministry? That's a point I'm leaving with. So thank you so much, Snehanshu, for your time, and really appreciate it. Thanks so much, all the participants. Thank you.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you so much for having me over. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.